You're not working anyway, so you must have plenty of free time.
My husband insisted that I take care of our grandchild to appease our son and his wife, who were frustrated from parenting. He had gifted them a spa getaway, but it was obvious he had no intention of looking after our grandson himself. If our son and his wife were unhappy, our grandson would inevitably be upset as well. Reluctantly, I agreed. However, from that moment on, my son and his wife began to treat it as a given that I would handle all the parenting and housework. To make matters worse, they went on to have a second child, and I ended up taking care of that one too. Both my husband and my son's family treated me as if I were nothing more than a babysitter and a housekeeper. But I was just a stay-at-home wife. I convinced myself that this was simply my responsibility and endured that life in silence. One day, though, everything changed. I went out shopping alone for the first time in a long while, leaving the grandkids behind. When I came home, I overheard my son and his wife casually mocking me as if I were just hired help.
Is the housekeeper here?
Housekeeper.
My husband didn't defend me at all. In fact, he seemed to agree with their disdain.
The useless housekeeper is honestly such a burden. Should we just live on our own?
When my son suggested cutting me out of their lives, my husband agreed.
Sounds good.
In that moment, all the love I had for my family evaporated. I silently left the house, and I swore to myself, I'll live my life the way I want. My name is Kate Carter. After graduating from a vocational school, I got a job in the hotel industry. It was there that I met Tom, who worked as a sales rep for one of the hotel suppliers. We got married when I was 23.
Wouldn't it be better to wait a little longer? Maybe get more settled in your job first.
That's what my dad worried about at the time. But back then, I thought, if you're going to marry the person you love, it doesn't matter if it's sooner or later. Fueled by the passion of young love, marriage seemed like the only option to me. Looking back now, I understand why my parents were so concerned. Tom was the same age as me, and he had only been working for 2 years after graduating college. His income wasn't bad, but it wasn't particularly great either. When both spouses are working, it's manageable, but I now understand that things change completely once children come into the picture. At 25, I gave birth to my son, David. Since we were worried about surviving on Tom's income alone, I wanted to continue working. However, in the hotel industry, most of the days off are during the week. Even if we put David in daycare, we would still need someone to take care of him on weekends. Although Tom's days off were usually on Saturdays and Sundays, he often had to work those days, so I couldn't rely on him to handle childcare every week. After discussing it as a couple, we decided I would become a stay-at-home mom. There were various reasons for this decision, but the main one was that Tom strongly wanted it.
I'll work harder for David's sake. Kate, I really want you to be there for him.
Tom was aware that his income at the time wasn't enough to fully support a wife and child, so he put even more effort into his work after David was born. As a result, I ended up handling almost all the parenting by myself. This often led to arguments between us. It was during those times that I first understood why my parents had suggested delaying our marriage. Sometimes I regretted not listening to their advice, but I have never regretted having David. Thanks to Tom's hard work and his relatively early promotion, David was able to graduate from college without taking on any student loans. We overcame those difficult years as a family and lived together for over 30 years. Then one day, David brought his fiancée home to meet us. Her name is Nina, and she is 3 years younger than David, making her 27. David is turning 30 this year. Since he has been working for about 8 years, his income should have increased by now, and he probably had some savings. It seemed like the perfect time for him to get married. Nina was adorable and left a great first impression. On the day she came to introduce herself, she said something so sweet to me while I was in the kitchen.
Kate, you're such a great cook, aren't you? Please teach me your recipes someday.
Tom also seemed to like Nina and couldn't stop praising her.
It's impressive that you plan to keep working even after getting married. Totally different from Kate, who's just a housewife.
I didn't appreciate being compared like that, but I knew responding would only ruin the mood. I tried my best to ignore Tom's remarks, but he continued making belittling comments about me.
Kate has been a stay-at-home mom ever since David was born, so all she knows is housework. Take notes from Nina.
When David started elementary school, I suggested getting a part-time job, but Tom dismissed the idea entirely. You? Work? No way. All you can do is housework, so just stick to taking care of the house.
It's amazing that you're so good at housework. I'm terrible at it.
As I tried to suppress my frustration and force a smile, Nina stepped in to ease the tension. Her kind words helped calm me down a little. She seemed so sweet and considerate, and I felt reassured that we might build a good mother-in-law and daughter-in-law relationship. However, as I listened more, I realized Nina wasn't just trying to make me feel better with her earlier comment. She eats out almost every day and hires a cleaning service twice a month for housekeeping. As for laundry, she does it herself, but only once a week in one big batch. That might work fine for living alone, but I started worrying about how she would handle household responsibilities after marriage. I never had David do any housework. Looking back, I regret not teaching him how to handle household chores. If both partners work, they should share household chores. If David had learned how to do housework, he could have taught his wife as well. As I was mulling this over, Tom suddenly said,
Why don't they live with us?
The suggestion of living together startled me. While I'd feel a bit lonely if David moved out, there's no way a young bride would want to live with her in-laws. But when the father-in-law makes such a suggestion, it's hard for the couple to outright refuse.
It would definitely make things livelier and more fun.
Tom was getting all excited by himself. Just as I opened my mouth to stop him, David spoke up.
That might be a good idea. There's plenty of room here, and Mom can take care of the housework.
It's true that our house, which we bought about 15 years ago, has 4 bedrooms, so space wouldn't be an issue. But from a daughter-in-law's perspective, living with in-laws is bound to be uncomfortable. I was exasperated by David's lack of consideration for Nina's feelings and was about to reprimand him. To my surprise, Nina cheerfully said,
It would really help if I could leave the housework to you.
I was taken aback by this unexpected turn of events. Don't you mind living with your in-laws? Nina replied with a question of her own.
Why? Both you and Tom seem so kind. I wouldn't mind at all. But would you not want that, Kate?
If you don't mind, Nina, I'd be happy to have you, I answered. I don't mind, but it's definitely going to require some effort. There's also the lingering worry about whether we might have conflicts in the future. However, refusing now would make me look like a mean mother-in-law, and it could cause immediate tension. Since I didn't have any negative impressions of Nina so far, I thought we could manage. I agreed to live together. A year after moving in together, our family dynamic remained positive. Because Nina worked, she and David left the house together in the mornings. I returned home around the same time. This gave me plenty of time to handle the housework during the day without feeling overwhelmed. After a year of peaceful cohabitation, I thought we could continue living harmoniously as a family. It turned out my earlier worries were unfounded. 6 months later, Nina gave birth to a baby boy. They named him Ethan, wishing for him to grow up to be a kind-hearted person. Tom and I were completely smitten with our first grandchild. Tom especially doted on him to the point where the house was overflowing with toys. However, when Nina returned to work 3 months after giving birth, the atmosphere in our home drastically changed. The stress of balancing work and parenting seemed to take its toll, and David and Nina began to argue frequently. Their frustration sometimes spilled over onto Tom and me.
Why don't you let Kate watch Ethan for a while and spend some time together?
Tired of being the target of their frustrations, Tom decided to gift David and Nina a one-night, 2-day trip to a spa. I was taken aback since I hadn't heard anything about this plan, and Tom said to me,
You're not working, so you've got plenty of free time. The least you can do is help lighten their load, right?
Since Nina returned to work, I've been the one taking care of Ethan during the day. He's not even a year old yet, so I can't take my eyes off him for a moment. When I clean or cook, I carry him in a baby carrier, and my back is constantly screaming in pain. I was frustrated that Tom made such decisions without asking me, expecting me to just handle it. But since Ethan had been crying more often, likely because of the tension between David and Nina, I agreed to Tom's suggestion, thinking it was for my grandson's sake. That turned out to be a big mistake. After their trip, David and Nina began regularly leaving Ethan in my care every weekend. Nina, who had previously said she wasn't good at housework, stopped doing any chores altogether and no longer asked me to teach her how to cook.
Our place is getting kind of messy. Mom, could you clean up?
Even the cleaning of their room was pushed onto me by David. We had agreed that they'd clean their own room because there might be things they didn't want me to see, but neither David nor Nina made any effort.
I'm swamped with work and taking care of Ethan. Please, Kate, can you help?
I didn't know where they were going every weekend, but as payday approached, they began asking Tom for extra money. Even when I'd cook dinner, they'd say things like, "I feel like pizza tonight. Let's order delivery." Or they'd come home late without notice, saying, "We ate out tonight." I told David to let me know if they didn't need dinner to avoid wasting food.
Dad's a manager now, so it's not that big of a deal, right?
Frustrated by David's unwillingness to listen, I turned to Tom for support.
You're the one managing the household budget.
He said, brushing me off without addressing the issue. This lifestyle continued for 3 years. When Ethan finally started preschool, Nina gave birth to their second child, a baby girl named Mia. It was a joyful event, but I couldn't help feeling it was too reckless, considering they couldn't even manage with just Ethan. Tom and I, due to financial concerns, had carefully planned to have only one child. We only have David. But Tom completely missed the point and said,
Don't take out your frustrations on Nina just because we only had one kid.
I wasn't envious of Nina for having a second child. Even now, I'm the one dropping Ethan off and picking him up from preschool. On weekends, they still leave him entirely in my care. I just couldn't imagine how David and Nina could possibly handle a second child under these circumstances. As expected, they both started using work as an excuse to dump all childcare responsibilities on me. Even before Nina returned to work, she was leaving Mia's nighttime feedings to me while she slept soundly. Ethan, perhaps feeling neglected by his parents or sensing my preoccupation with Mia, started regressing. He cried and threw tantrums, refusing to go to preschool, and even began waking up at night, crying, "Please, at least take care of your kids yourselves on your days off." Exhausted, I finally pleaded with David and Nina. If I could at least recover my energy over the weekends, taking care of the grandkids during the weekdays might become easier. But David and Nina responded,
Mom, all you can do is housework, so the least you can do is help with the kids too.
I have a job. Unlike you, Kate, I'm earning money, so it's only fair you take care of this.
To make matters worse, when Tom heard about my request, he also criticized me.
They are working hard. The least you can do is handle the housework and childcare.
I felt so depressed, as if I were nothing more than a babysitter and housekeeper. But the grandkids were adorable. If I, as a stay-at-home wife, didn't do it, the kids might end up suffering. I kept telling myself it was my duty as a housewife and endured. 2 years passed with me constantly busy with housework and childcare. Ethan turned 5 and became a sweet older brother who adored Mia. Mia also reached an age where she could hold simple conversations, making childcare much easier. One weekend, surprisingly, no one in the house went out, and everyone stayed home. It had been years since that last happened. Ethan clung to David and Nina, happy to finally have both parents' attention. Even though Tom didn't help with childcare, he doted on Mia, entertaining her all day. For the first time, I genuinely felt that all my efforts to help with childcare had been worth it. This, I thought, was what family life should look like, and my eyes welled up with emotion. To hide my tears, I left the grandkids with the family and went out to shop for dinner. Shopping without the grandkids for the first time in a while allowed me to finish much faster than usual. With the extra time, I decided to prepare a more elaborate meal that evening. With those thoughts in mind, I hurried home. I was dreaming of a happy future surrounded by my husband, my son and his wife, and my grandchildren. At least, that's what I thought at the time. As I entered the house and headed straight for the kitchen, I overheard Tom, David, and Nina talking in the living room. Ethan and Mia were quiet, probably napping. Our house has a layout where the kitchen connects to the front entrance via one door, and the living room is accessible from the hallway through another door. Because of this, none of them realized I had returned. I was about to peek into the living room, smiling at the heartwarming scene of family bonding, when David said something shocking.
Is the housekeeper around?
Housekeeper. David, that's so mean.
Nina replied, laughing despite her words. They were clearly talking about me. After all the housework and childcare I had managed on my own, I couldn't believe they'd say such things about me. The happiness I felt just moments ago froze instantly. I hid quietly in the kitchen corner, listening to their conversation without revealing I was home.
She even dumped the grandkids on us today so she could go shopping alone. Seriously, she's so useless.
Rather than stopping them, Tom joined in, also mocking me.
A nagging, useless housekeeper like her is such a burden. Should we just live on our own?
I had always thought about my family, offering advice and taking care of housework. Knowing that my son thought of me this way made me realize that all my efforts had been in vain.
Yeah, go for it.
It seemed Tom, just like David, wanted me out of the house. In that moment, all the love I had for my family vanished. I silently left the house and made a firm decision in my heart. I'm going to live life the way I want. A few hours later, Tom must have noticed the groceries I'd left in bags in the kitchen and called me. When I ignored his calls, he sent me a message.
Where are you? Leaving groceries out like that. What were you thinking?
He sounded angry, but I was the one who was furious. You're the ones who said I wasn't needed after all the housework and childcare I've done for this family. With that thought, I continued to ignore all their messages. That night, I stayed at a business hotel and planned my next steps. The next day, while everyone was at work, I went back to the house to gather my essential belongings. I felt sad knowing I wouldn't see Ethan and Mia, but there was no other choice. Being told by both my husband and son that I wasn't needed had completely broken me. Thankfully, I had some savings, not much, but enough. Before my grandkids were born, I'd secretly worked part-time without Tom knowing. I'd helped out as an assistant at a cooking class run by a friend from culinary school. It started when the assistant fell ill, and my friend begged me to step in. The school we attended had been a culinary vocational school. My friend had gone on to open her own cooking class at the age of 30 after leaving a big-name cooking school. For now, I decided to work at her cooking class while searching for a new place to live. Every day, Tom kept calling me, but I continued to ignore him. David and Nina also bombarded me with messages.
Ethan and Mia keep asking, "Where's Grandma? Are you really going to make them sad?"
The kids won't listen to us because they're looking for you. Please come back.
Imagining my grandkids being upset broke my heart, but honestly, they should be closer to their parents than to me, their grandmother. The fact that they weren't listening to their parents was the result of David and Nina neglecting them for so long. I had always been there for them, thinking I had to because I was a stay-at-home wife, but that only enabled their behavior. For the kids' sake, I hoped David and Nina would start prioritizing their time with them. A few days after I left the house, Tom sent me an email.
If you're not coming back, I'm filing for divorce.
Having already made up my mind to leave, I'd consulted a lawyer beforehand. I was relieved that I could finalize the divorce without much trouble. I replied briefly, "I'll come by this Sunday to sign the divorce papers." I used the phrase "come by" rather than "return" to emphasize that I was done with this chapter of my life. On the promised Sunday, when I arrived at the house, Tom, David, and Nina were all there waiting for me. Ethan spotted me and tried to run into my arms. Mia toddled after him, but Nina stopped Mia before she could reach me.
You don't need her as your grandma anymore. Ethan and Mia, you have the Taylor grandma, don't you?
Taylor was Nina's maiden name, but her parents had little contact with Ethan and Mia, aside from sending gifts for their birthdays and Christmas. Whether Nina discouraged them or they were being considerate of us, I wasn't sure, but it didn't matter. To Ethan and Mia, they were practically strangers. Ethan, not being the type to easily open up to someone he barely knew, only recognized their name. As for Mia, they were likely as good as complete strangers to her. Telling young kids that such people were their grandma was bound to cause confusion. Predictably, Ethan and Mia began crying loudly. David, irritated, shouted at them.
Be quiet. Stop crying.
Not having done any real parenting, he clearly didn't realize that yelling doesn't work at their age. Both kids flinched and then started crying even harder. While Nina sighed and tried to comfort them, Tom thrust the signed divorce papers at me. I was appalled by how inappropriate it was to do this in front of small children. Fortunately, Nina took the kids to the bedroom, and I felt relieved. At the living room table, I signed the divorce papers that Tom had already signed. David and Nina had also signed as witnesses, clearly supporting my departure from this house. Even while I was signing, David continued to insult me alongside Tom.
You're just a useless housekeeper. Acting all high and mighty about not wasting money when you don't even earn a single cent. This is what you got.
This so-called useless housekeeper is the reason this household functioned at all, I retorted as I tossed 5 notebooks onto the table.
What is this?
Tom asked, flipping one open, while David peered over his shoulder. But neither of them seemed to understand what was written inside. David sneered and mocked me.
What's the point of showing us diaries? Are you trying to brag about how hard you worked?
Tom, looking exasperated, said,
Don't tell me you're going to say you don't want a divorce now.
It was my turn to feel exasperated. To Tom and David, these notebooks seemed like mere diaries. Sure, they included records of Ethan and Mia's milestones and notes about things I had pointed out to the family each day. But neither of them realized that that wasn't all they contain. If you can look at these and feel nothing, I seriously doubt you two can manage to live happily without me. I gave them a condescending look, finally indulging in a bit of payback for everything I had endured. Tom exploded in anger, shouting,
Don't act so high and mighty, you damn housekeeper.
Well, if you're calling me a housekeeper, maybe I should be paid for my services. My retort made Tom falter for a moment, but he quickly recovered and started yelling at me again.
Enough. Who do you think kept you living comfortably all these years?
It was such a cliché argument, the kind used by domineering husbands, and I couldn't help but feel disgusted. Really? And who do you think made sure you had meals ready without lifting a finger? Who washed and prepared your clothes so you could go to work? Who kept the house clean so you had a comfortable place to live? I responded with a standard retort. This time, David shot back at me.
Nina can handle housework just fine. She's always laughed and said, "That's all it takes," whenever she watched you doing chores.
I was appalled by David, who had no intention of sharing household responsibilities despite being in a dual-income marriage. At the same time, I reflected on where I might have gone wrong in raising him. I also doubted that Nina, who had previously claimed to be bad at housework, could suddenly handle it, yet David seemed completely serious. At that moment, Nina came out of the bedroom and complained.
The kids finally fell asleep for their nap, so keep it down.
She complained that my presence was causing tension within the family. It seemed Nina was also dissatisfied with me being there. Her attitude was unbelievable, given all the childcare I had done for her. After relying on me to care for the kids until they were older, she now treated me as an outsider. I realized painfully that to my daughter-in-law, I was just a stranger. It was a different feeling from when Tom or David criticized me. In terms of harshness, their insults were far worse. But with Nina, I felt nothing. No anger, no disappointment, just nothing. I never enjoyed hanging her laundry, including her underwear. But out of consideration, I always hung them where Tom wouldn't see them and folded them neatly afterward. Looking back, I realized this brazen daughter-in-law probably wouldn't have cared if Tom had seen them. The positive impression I'd had of her when we first met had completely disappeared. Nina turned to me, who hadn't said a word, and smirked.
Once you're done signing, can you leave? This isn't your house anymore.
But I still had unfinished business. If you're done saying what you wanted, it's my turn to share something. Looking puzzled, the three of them watched as I pulled out a voice recorder and pressed play. Since Mia was born, the verbal abuse from all three of them toward me had only gotten worse. When I confided in a friend who ran a cooking class, she gave me this recorder.
Evidence will be crucial if you ever decide to divorce.
She had said. At the time, I had no intention of getting divorced. But she encouraged me to record our daily conversations, saying they might at least make for a funny story later. The recorder, designed for recording cooking class lectures, had a maximum recording capacity of about 250 hours. It could record more than 10 days of audio, even when running continuously for 24 hours a day. When I pressed play, the first voice that came through was Ethan's. It was a recording of him saying he loved me, followed by him asking if his mom and dad hated him. Next came Nina's voice as she returned home, coldly brushing off Ethan's cheerful "mommy." Then her scathing remarks about me.
I'm tired from work, so take care of the grandkids properly. You're so useless.
It wasn't just Nina's voice on the recording. Shortly after, Tom's voice could also be heard as he returned home.
Can't you tidy up this room properly? There are toys scattered everywhere.
It recorded Tom scolding me, despite my explanation that the mess was from Ethan playing earlier.
You're a stay-at-home wife, so handle this properly.
David's harsh words about me were also captured.
Can you stop dumping housework and childcare on Nina? That's your job as a stay-at-home mom.
When I emphasized the importance of bonding with the kids through physical interaction, David's dismissive remarks were replayed.
You're a stay-at-home mom, aren't you? If you're not going to handle the housework and childcare, then you're basically useless. Don't you get that?
Of course, the recent remark, that useless housekeeper is such a nuisance. Should we just live on our own? Was also recorded. I'll be seeking compensation for the emotional distress caused by the three of you. The three of them immediately refused. If you're unwilling, should we settle this in court? That would add legal fees to the amount. I added. My confident stance made them hesitate. I have sufficient evidence, verified by my lawyer. What's your decision? I pressed further. Realizing they couldn't win, they reluctantly agreed to pay the compensation. That was, of course, recorded as well. I didn't want any disputes later about who said what. Afterward, I formally engaged a lawyer to handle the claims. Each of them agreed to pay the compensation in installments under their individual names. The divorce was finalized, and I successfully found a new place to live. I began enjoying life on my own. I worked part-time at a cafe restaurant and continued helping at my friend's cooking class. I also started a daily blog about meal planning. I used to believe that making meals my family enjoyed was enough to bring happiness. I used to think that attending culinary school was solely to bring joy to my family, but I've come to realize it was just an excuse for giving up on my dreams. The real reason I went to culinary school was because I wanted to create dishes that many people would say were delicious. It was only after my divorce that I recognized how I had forcibly suppressed that passion. Half a year into my fulfilling new life, Tom called me. Because I was concerned about Ethan and Mia, I hadn't blocked his number in case of an emergency. However, I don't answer the phone, thinking they'll leave a message or send an email if there is something really urgent. However, despite the incessant calls, there were no messages left or emails sent. I finally answered to tell Tom to go through my lawyer if he had any business with me, but before I could say a word, he started talking unilaterally. If someone else had picked up the call, they would have heard him exposing embarrassing details about our family's private affairs. I grew tired of it midway and put the phone on speaker while I continued cooking. Apparently, after our divorce, their finances fell into chaos.
What's wrong with them? They're burning through all the money I earn.
Tom was whining, but I had warned him. He had left all household finances to me and refused to listen to my concerns. Now it was none of my business. Yet Tom made an unreasonable request.
Could you return some of the compensation money? It's your son's fault after all.
I initially planned to remain silent, but I couldn't hold back and retorted. Did I give birth to David all by myself? You're his parent too, aren't you? I reminded Tom that I had repeatedly asked him to intervene when David refused to listen to me, but instead, he sided with David and belittled me. Then Tom revealed something shocking. Not only was he struggling to pay off the compensation in installments, but he also couldn't control David and Nina's spending, which led him into debt. Unable to keep up with loan repayments, Tom panicked about his debt being exposed at work and embezzled money from the company, abusing his position as a manager.
I only intended to borrow it for a short time. I was planning to repay it.
He justified failing to grasp the gravity of his actions. It was clearly embezzlement, not a loan. Ultimately, not only was the debt discovered, but the embezzlement came to light. The company president, acknowledging Tom's years of service, refrained from involving the police, but Tom had to resign. It wouldn't have been surprising if he had been dismissed for cause and reported to the police, but thanks to the CEO's leniency, he was allowed to resign voluntarily. In essence, it was equivalent to being fired. However, rumors have a way of spreading unpredictably, and it seems he is struggling to find a new job. At nearly 60 years old, and as a former department manager, it's understandable that potential employers might see him as difficult to manage. Moreover, he has a lot of pride, so he wants to become a full-time employee rather than a senior part-time job. Such job might not be entirely unavailable, but it's undoubtedly a very narrow path. I couldn't help but think he should prioritize earning something, however small, rather than clinging to his pride, but I refrained from pointing it out. After all, he's the highly capable former department manager, unlike useless me, so he must have a better plan. Besides, I knew that no matter what I said, he wouldn't listen anyway.
Nina doesn't do any housework at all, and the house is a complete mess.
As expected, Nina, who admitted she wasn't good at housework, apparently didn't do any of it. Outsourcing all the cleaning only added to the expenses. Feeling overwhelmed, Tom tried addressing it with Nina, but he ended up being berated by both Nina and David. Eventually, things deteriorated to the point where it impacted the care of Ethan and Mia, leading David to decide to leave with Nina and the kids. Tom resolved that each person should take care of their own share, Tom for himself, and David and Nina for their family. Now, managing the 4-bedroom house alone, Tom proposed we get back together. But I flatly refused. I've grown to enjoy my independence and have no intention of returning to the life I left behind.
I was wrong back then. Being apart made me realize how much I valued you, Kate. We'd be happier together.
Tom's words did nothing to sway me, as there's no benefit for me in going back. Had he realized this before the divorce, I might have considered reconciliation, but now those feelings are long gone. I gave Tom a chance before the divorce was finalized. He ignored it and dismissed me, so hearing him say now that he needs me doesn't stir any emotions in me at all. When I came to sign the divorce papers, did you even bother to look at the notebooks I left? When I asked, Tom had completely forgotten I'd left anything behind. Those notebooks weren't just journals, they were detailed household ledgers. Each day's expenses were meticulously documented, making it easy to see where the money was going. I created them to keep costs under control, writing everything out by hand in budget notebooks. Tom's failure to even glance at them, while allowing David and Nina's spending to spiral, was his own fault. Only now, after everything has collapsed, does he realize I had been quietly working to hold things together.
Please, I don't know how to do housework or manage finances. I need your help.
Tom, barely getting by with odd jobs, begged for assistance. But I had no intention of taking him back. While I do worry about Ethan and Mia, it's David and Nina's responsibility as parents to care for them. It's only right that David and Nina, as the parents, take full responsibility for raising their children. If something happens to them, I'd be willing to help. But now, while they're healthy and capable of working, this isn't the time for me to step in. Not only has Tom become a stranger after our divorce, but he's also a grown man. He has gone through plenty of experiences and should figure out solutions based on those. If it's something unfamiliar to him, it's best for him to rely on David, who is his blood relative. After all, it was Tom himself who said he didn't need me. If you want to hire me as your housekeeper, you'll need to pay accordingly. I made the sarcastic remark and hung up the phone. Since then, I haven't been in touch with Tom. However, I've continued to pursue alimony through my lawyer. At one point, David also reached out for help, but I firmly declined. I'm just a useless housekeeper who doesn't earn a penny, right? You and Nina, as a dual-income couple, are capable. So there's no need to depend on me, is there? Hearing this, Tom seemed at a loss for words, and I ended the call. Since then, there's been no further contact. I've heard through others that their spending habits haven't changed, and their debt continues to grow. Still, I'm told that the couple is working as hard as they can to ensure their kids don't live in hardship. Meanwhile, I've kept working part-time while assisting at my friend's cooking school.
An employee just left, so why don't you officially join us as an instructor?
Fortunately, my friend offered me a position, and I was able to start working as a teacher. I've come to appreciate the joy of spending money I've earned myself. Now that I live alone, I can confidently say being a stay-at-home mom is a respectable job. Living alone, I can do housework whenever I want, and even leave things a little messy if I choose. But stay-at-home moms always think about their family's needs and adjust their schedules accordingly. The reason stay-at-home moms often feel unappreciated likely lies in how their families treat them. If they're regularly shown gratitude, or at least not looked down upon, they wouldn't feel undervalued. Having a healthy, happy family and occasionally hearing words of appreciation is as rewarding as receiving a paycheck. Perhaps I felt the compensation I received was insufficient, which led me to feel marginalized and unable to continue in that role. While everyone's perspective is different, I believe people need to feel needed by someone to truly live.